So thanks for coming, and please, please, please do let me know if you would like to have your voice or your video anonymized, because we do use these things for marketing and recording for other parents to watch. So please let me know. It's not a problem. We can blur it out in editing. Let's get started with one of our community questions that were sourced from the Autism 360 parent community. And Gemma asks, well, it's not really a question. It's more of a statement of where her kiddo is at. So it's, my son doesn't answer questions. He can communicate requests and makes comments when interested, but communication isn't always initiated by him. When we try to initiate conversation, it's usually ignored. And I think this is quite a, well, it's certainly something that I've come across with my parents. Stacy, did you want to start us off?
Well, so I love that the parent said makes comments when interested. And I always say, I mean, most of us only comment when we're interested. And I think the hard part is that it's hard to not have an interest reciprocated, right? When you're a parent and you love painting, and even outside of having, an autistic child, if, men who are into sports and they have a kiddo who's not into sports, it's like, how do I relate and communicate to my child? Because this is my interest. And, this is a tough one. And the reality is, most people don't communicate in general unless you're interested or if you have something invested in the communication, right? I think the difference between folks who are autistic and folks who are not autistic is autistic individuals are just very concrete and matter of fact. It's like they're, my autistic friends, it's really funny when I say good morning, they're like, you don't need to waste time saying good morning. It's like a unnecessary statement, right? So I don't say good morning anymore because it's unnecessary. It's a waste of text for them to read according to their routine. So I think it's hard for those of us who, as a speech therapist, I am a communicator. Even before I was a speech therapist, I was a communicator. So it is difficult to understand why, right? However, the reality is that parents want to connect with their child. And so if you want to get more communication or get more social engagement, or if you want to set up the scenario so your child initiates conversation, you have to let them take the lead and let them thrive off of their interest. Yes, that means you may have to listen to the same conversation about trains or weather or hurricanes, but that's where they are, and it is what it is. I'm not saying that, and Ozgul, you can maybe piggyback on this in terms of, I'm not saying that you can't you have to accept your child will never converse with you. I'm saying that children in general are really not that interested in talking to their parents. It's only because of the way we parent in today's society, where our children are just not outside in the backyard where you played for hours and you really just came in for food and what you needed. Everyone is sort of in the same space all day. And so everyone feels obligated, right, to force to socialize. And it's tough. It's really tough. And it's hard as a mom or a dad to realize that your kid's just not interested in talking to you, right? That doesn't mean they don't love you. It doesn't mean that they don't want to be with you. It's just hard work to communicate. And anyone that has to work hard to communicate is not going to use their energy to put everything forward to communicate on something that's not highly motivating. I mean, that is just a coping strategy to not lead to autistic burnout, right? Like, I'm going to save my energy for the times I really need to communicate or want to communicate. Ozgul, what do you have to say on that?
Yeah, look, I totally agree with everything, all of the above, Stacy. And I think what you've said around that reciprocation, the reciprocal communication can sometimes be really difficult as well for our kiddos. So I think it's really also important to remember that, language is quite an abstract form. So, we just take it for granted. But it's tricky. And, questions can actually vary in their complexity. So there are questions that are easier. So something like, what's this? Is going to be easier to answer because I can show you, or, I can see something concrete, as opposed to, when do you want to eat your dinner? Like, that's a more complex question. So, like you said, Stacey, I think that, if it's difficult, then I'm going to possibly avoid it. Or I may not understand that reciprocal communication. So I may not understand that it's a ask a question, answer, and then I ask a question, you answer. So it's about, I think, if we want to see more questions, it's about building in that reciprocal communication. And it always has to go through, like you said, through the child's interests. If they're interested, it's that what's in it for me component. If I'm interested, I'm going to engage, I'm going to pay attention, and I'm going to respond more so than if it was just a boring, unrelated question.
Yeah.
Totally.
And I know it's tough. I know it's tough for parents. I totally get it. I totally get it. I really do understand. It can be really frustrating. But if you just accept the fact that you might have to talk about the weather. I mean, I've had the best conversations with my students with talking about the weather. I am so not interested in the weather, right? But that is what is exciting to this kiddo, and that's what he will start. And then I can lead him to other things, right? Once I have that going, and I've developed that trust where I'm not going to take away his interest, that's how you can build it. So I guess to answer the question, but not question, that I know is a very common scenario for families, is number one, realize that, remember, our kids are humans. So if they're not interested, they're not interested. A lot of times we as adults do things only because we have to, right? We don't really want to, but we have to. All of us have gone to weddings and talked to people at weddings that we don't really want to talk to, right? Most autistic individuals are like, oh, checked out, not going to do that, not interested. So I think it's understanding that and just really just wallow in their interest. That's all I can say. And it will just, it'll happen. It'll just happen.
Totally.
That's my answer.
Yeah, I love that like working with your kiddo's interests when you're trying to initiate conversation. Start with where they're at. They're going to chat with you if you ask them about what type of train is the 1043, but they're not necessarily going to ask you when you're talking to them about something you're interested. That's pretty actionable. I love that. And I think this one from Rosalind, hi Liz, lovely to have you, was kind of piggybacked off Gemma's question that we just answered, and it was, my son doesn't answer questions either. Also, when he tells me he's hungry, he will say, "Are you hungry?" He has echolalia, and I'd love information on that. So I know that Stacy, you love a good echolalia shaping moment. We love our functional communication, don't we?
I do. I remember when 20 years ago, echolalia was a bad word, right? Like, get rid of it. And I remember thinking, I don't understand why it's so bad. It's really kind of funny and it's cool and it's really kind of interesting, and you just like go with it, right? But then of course, when I learned to understand, and then now we have, much better information. But I will say, in regards to any family that's listening, in regards to echolalia, when your kiddos are demonstrating echolalia, it's a really good thing, right? It's a really, really, really good thing. Number one, it means that verbal communication may be a little bit easier for them to use as a primary method, maybe some backup, maybe not. But it also is a really good sign that your kiddo understands the power of communication and that they are actually initiating and trying and really making attempts and trying to understand you and go back and forth. They're just doing it in a way that works for them. And I know that Ozgul and Michelle and I have been sort of exchanging links to some really good information and some fun ways that some new speech therapists in the field, those young girls in their 20s, all enthusiastic and putting new things together for us, are really helping not only therapists, but helping parents understand that echolalia can be very useful, and it is purposeful to your child. It's just you have to sort of be a detective to figure out the cheat sheet, right? Like, what does that mean? What are some strategies that you commonly use, Ozgul, with parents who are sort of shaping that echolalia?
Yeah, good question. And totally agree with you, Stacey. You know, years ago, echolalia was seen as something that you had to get rid of. But in fact, it's very effective in using the child's echolalia to get a response or shape that response into something that we're expecting them to use or we want them to use. So, and I often find, you know, when, like that example that parent asked around my child's just asking, are you hungry? But maybe they mean, I'm hungry. I always talk about, you know, let's think about, well, what is my child exposed to? What have they heard me using? You know, am I always asking, are you hungry? Because if that's what they're hearing and they're associating that with the eating or meal times, then that's why they're echoing. They're saying, are you hungry? But then it's about looking behind the meaning of that. You know, what is my child wanting to convey? Are they hungry? Is that what they're saying? So they're actually saying, I'm hungry. So, you know, if we're wanting to, and I often say to parents, look, if you want to hear something from your child, it's about you using the phrase in the way that your child would normally use it. So say it as they would if they could. So if they're saying, are you hungry? But you know they mean, I'm hungry, then I would respond to that in those words. So in my child's words. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes. It's almost like you make it as naturalistic as possible to respond back to them, because you want to acknowledge that communication and acknowledge that, yes, I know that you're trying to communicate something, but you also finish with what the other phrase is that you I don't want to say want them to use, because sometimes kids need to rely on those scripts, but and if we're looking for them to say, I am hungry, then that's what you finish with, because you know they're going to echo it. And I know I have in the workshop, there's a video of me sort of demonstrating that with a kiddo. I actually wrote up a protocol, which was a huge challenge for me, because every kid has a different phrase, right? It's not like everybody says the same thing back. But I will quickly, just for the purposes of parents who are listening, just to demonstrate exactly what Ozgul said in terms of the strategy. So if a kiddo says, you know, if mom says, are you hungry? And they say, are you hungry? Naturalistically, remember, we're modeling communication. You can just use that tone and say, are you hungry? Am I hungry? I'm not hungry. I want to know if you're hungry, right? And then if they say you're hungry, you'll say, oh, I'm not hungry. I am hungry. And then they say, I am hungry. And then you say, oh, I'm going to give you something to eat. So then they realize, ooh, I said that. She got it, right? And it's tricky because, like I said, it's not always the same phrase, right? Like you have to like really think about how you want to end it. But I also think it's important for you to change your intonation to let them know, I think I understand, but I'm not sure I understand, because then that gives them the feedback of next time I might need to make an adjustment, right? And more consistently you do that, yes, they're going to do it more. I mean, most little kids echo for long periods of time because it's a very reliable method of communicating. Once you've gotten that phrase, are you hungry? Are you hungry? Are you hungry? You know, you can say that reliably and not have to formulate the other way. And everyone can maybe think of any kiddo that you know, that when you say, how are you? And they say, I'm 5, because what have we taught them to script? How old are you? 5? How old are you? They just hear how are, right? They're just following the script of somebody asked me a question. They usually ask me how old I am, and that's where they answer. And that's all kids, not just, you know, our kiddos. So it's part of the language process. We just have to respond so that they can get the feedback to make adjustments if they need to. But get that cheat sheet out, like,
yeah,
like, no,
the idea of using intonation as a tool to help your kiddo understand what you're sort of expecting from them, or helping to make that language as useful to them as possible.
Yes.
One of the parents.
It's okay. I'm so
Yeah.
sorry, Ella. I'm so
No.
sorry. I want parents to know it's okay if your child knows that you don't understand them. Like you can't make adjustments if you don't know that you're not being understood.
Yeah.
So it's okay to literally say, I have no clue what you want. I'm so sorry, right? And then that's a way of communicating. And yes, they may get frustrated because they can't pull anything else together, or they may walk away, but at least you're being honest about, I don't understand you. And then they know you're not just ignoring me, you really just don't understand me, right? Doesn't mean that, less frustration, but it's okay to not understand and say you don't understand. If that makes sense, right? We don't always have to act like we understand if we really don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Anita's just asking, if your kiddo says yes or no to, if your child says yes and no to both options that you're say in that scenario, are you hungry, and you're asking them to say yes or no, and you don't know exactly what your child is meaning, if it's yes or no, could you shed some light, maybe Ozgul, on how to manage that situation when they're, I guess, not able to use yes and no in the way that you're expecting them to?
Sure. So in terms of understanding the question, if they're still unclear about, when you say, do you want this or do you like this? And it's yes or no is randomly used. I would again go back to modeling. So the response, and you can try. So, again, what Stacy was saying around before, if you don't know, it's okay not to know. The same applies in this situation. Sometimes it can be a bit of a guessing game. So you might ask a question and then you might get a response. Well, respond to it as your child has given you the response. Now, you may be wrong in that situation. So you've said, do you want the banana? And your child says yes, but they meant no, or they didn't want it. Then, let that occur first. And then you can actually model and provide a response where we're shaping that response. So, and I would be just thinking about beyond the words as well. So think about our overall communication. It's not just the words. I'd be using, again, my tone of voice, my body language. So if I mean no, so I'd use facial expression, shake my head. I might use physical, like I might push it away. So I'm actually modeling a really clear no response. And you might say, oh, I don't want it. No. So that's going to be a lot easier for your child over time. And if you're consistent in that response, for them to learn and understand, and if you just went, oh no, you don't want it. Like, so we've got to, I think, emphasize the language that we're expecting, or that our child is trying to convey that message. But we're not going to always get it right. They may say yes and then no, but they may be unsure as well. So that's my response. But Stacy, have you got anything to add to that?
No, I think it's just also the layer of remembering that sometimes kids are indecisive. I mean, some people are just in general indecisive. The other part is that executive functioning can really get in the way in regards to making a choice. Some kids feel a little bit pressure when it comes to making choices, whether it's, do you want this, yes or no, or which do you want, apple or banana? And then one of the other components is in regards to the brain-body connection. Sometimes kids will reach for the apple, but they really want the banana, and they're telling their hand, like, get the banana, but it goes to the apple. And then when they get the apple, of course, mom's like, but you said you want the apple. They go in the meltdown because they're not upset about the apple. They're upset because their hand didn't grab the one that they wanted, right? It didn't point to the one, the connection just didn't follow through, which is very frustrating. But executive functioning can really get in the way of choice making and yes or no. And my final clause to parents is, be careful what yes or no questions you ask, because you have to be prepared for them to say no.
Yeah.
No is a very powerful word, and it's a necessary word. So just think about those questions that you ask. A lot of times parents will ask questions, yes or no, but they want them to say yes, and the kids say no. And I'm like, oh, you gave them an out. Like, that's your boss saying, do you want to come in, do you want to work late? Nope. It's like, well, wait a minute. I wanted you to say yes. You gave me the option when you said yes or no question. So
Absolutely.
just
That's a good
remember
one.
that language component.
Yeah.
Remember that your kiddos are working really, really hard to communicate. That's a lot of hard work.
Absolutely. And I think that this next question from one of our parents here, it kind of builds interestingly, but takes in a different direction. How do we work with our teens on communication motivation? It can be a whole different ball game, or is it a whole different ball game? Obviously, it's different for every kiddo, but just shedding some light on motivation to communicate specifically for teens.
I think that when it comes to motivation around communication, the person just has to want to interact and socialize. I mean, there are introverts and extroverts all over the world unrelated to autism. There are some people like myself who never stop talking, and there are other people who literally say 1 or 2 words a day, and they're fine with that, right? I don't understand it, but I know that there are people out there like that.
You heard that it's true,
Yeah. And so I think it's a matter of, I only think of it in a concerning way if the child expresses the need to want to, socialize, like if they want to do things, and they're feeling like they want to engage, but they're really, really struggling. Then you just have to lay out a plan. And I fully believe in including teens, even young children, but it's certainly including teens in the plan. Like, what is it you want to accomplish? And one of the things that I kind of do with teens is when they have like some, to sort of like motivate them from an indirect way, right? So let's say that they want to participate in something, drama club. I want to be in the drama musical, right? I really want to try for the drama musical. And, from their perspective, all I have to do is stand up and sing. I don't really have to socialize and engage. It's going to be, not that, I mean, I can do that. But part of that is you have to participate in all of these other things that lead up to singing, right? So with that goal that they really want, they're motivated, they really want to be in that musical, that's when you can use that to say, okay, these are 3 things that you're going to have to work really hard on in order to get to this, right? And sometimes that can be the motivator for, it's like anything else, right? Like, I want to be a doctor. Okay, so I have to really study hard and go to school. I may not like studying hard, but I have to do that in order to become a doctor, and that's really what I want. So sometimes with teens, it's thinking about what they want that's not directly connected, and then getting some steps and a plan in place that will motivate them to start working towards, like, you're going to have to participate in whatever they do before a musical, and rehearsals and all that other stuff. I think you guys understand the concept.
Yeah. Anything to add, Ozgul? Nope, not on that one. Yeah, I think, I mean, I know I'm not a speechy, but I'm just going to like put my 2 cents in here. I think this almost interestingly links back to what you were saying before, Stacy, about like, are they interested in it? Like, do they care? Especially for our teens, right? Like when they start getting into that, that phase where they're really figuring out their identity, they're trying to figure out who they want to be in the world. There's all sorts of new spheres of interest, and especially that, social world does become that so much more motivating to them in their teen years. What are they interested in? What do they care about? Use that as the way of engaging with them. If they are suddenly really interested in, I don't know, power in their class, chat with them about that. They're going to really, maybe that's something that's really interesting to them. Or if they're all of a sudden really interested in, I don't know, some online gaming, which is bewildering to me, but I will engage with it if it means that I can get my kiddos to talk to me about something. I'll be like, yeah, Minecraft, always loved it. Like asking Siri to tell me little things about Minecraft that I can talk to my kids about, you know. And I think that as long as you can't go wrong if it's relationship driven. If what you're doing is building your relationship with your kiddo, especially with your teen, you can't go wrong. Build your relationship, and the communication, you know, not going to get worse, is all I will say, sort of thing.
I'd like to share a story. You know, I like to share stories.
Yes.
For context. So I'd like to share a story about one of my students when I was in Puerto Rico. And she was very creative. Verbal communication was her primary method. She was bilingual, but she preferred English. And she had a friend that she went through school, and she wanted the friend to come over, and, you know, I want her to be my friend and I want to hang out with my friend. But the friend no longer wanted to come over, and they were both autistic. The friend didn't want to come over anymore because my student was sort of dominating and directing what they were going to do, right? And so she kept saying, I really want her to come over. And I said, well, this is the deal, right? If you want her to come over, friendship is a give and take. So these are the things that you're going to have to do for her to come over, because you got to negotiate, right? It can't just be sort of you directing, which, you know, interestingly enough, their interaction was they both came over and they both just drew comics and didn't talk to each other, but they had a great time, right? Like, it was a blast. However, she wanted to direct what kind of comics she did, right? Like, she was sort of like, well, I want you to do this. And so we had to really work out almost like this, not a friendship contract, but we had to come up with like an agreement of, if you want her to come over and stay and hang out with you, you're going to have to give these 3 things, and you can take these 2 things and ask her what she wants. And then you guys need to have, you know, a plan. And so that's what we had to work on. Now, that wasn't an overnight, right? That was work. That was having a failure the first 2 times because it was really hard for her. But eventually they found their happy medium. And that's exactly what you said. That's what relationships are, right? Friendships, any relationship is give and take. And so helping her because she wanted it. It wasn't that her mom wanted it. It wasn't that I thought she should hang out with friends. She wanted it, right? She wanted to hang out with this particular person. And so she had to understand that process. So it's work, and you can support them through that concretely, not abstractly, concretely.
This question was one of the ones that I had for you guys, because it's something that has come up a few times in my you know, with my own clients, and that is getting you guys to weigh in on the bilinguality or more than one language being used in the home. I get a lot of my clients coming in having been told by speechies that they should be only using one language. That's not what the research shows, but I would love you guys to weigh in on that. Ozgul, I can see you've got some thoughts to share.
Yeah, I think this is a real, it's close to my heart because I'm bilingual as well.
Okay.
And I've worked in Europe a little bit, and just working with all the families, I think in Australia too, you know, it's a multicultural country. And
totally.
And I think, you know, there is a misconception sometimes that children who are exposed to more than language are perhaps confused, or if they may get confused if they use more than one language.
Totally.
And, you know, sometimes that's based on things like if the child's mixing languages together in the same sentence, it's presumed that the child is confused, when in fact the child is actually doing something really clever. They are accessing the words they know from each language and putting it together and formulating a sentence or a message. So that's actually a skill. It's awesome that the child's doing that. It's not that they're confused. And when you look at the evidence or the research, years ago, I did a bit of a critical analysis on the bilingualism and just, you know, the evidence out there. And there was no evidence to say that being bilingual or even trilingual delayed you or caused difficulties. In fact, the research tells us that the children who are exposed to more than one language have what we call better metalinguistic skills or higher level thinking skills. So they're more flexible thinkers. And the other thing, I guess, with bilingualism is that, and Stacey, you can weigh in on this too, is that, around that, are they confused? They're using more than one language in the sentence. Well, it's okay if the child uses it because they're accessing what they know best, or, what they know at the time. But for us, it's really important to be aware of how we're communicating. And although it's impossible to always just speak in a single language, I always say to parents, be aware that you're not chopping and changing your languages as much as possible, because every language has its own grammatical structure and rules. So so just be aware of that. You can repeat it in the other language, or, whatever's comfortable for you. But I think it's really important that we're aware, but also feel confident in that you're not delaying your child by exposing them to another language, particularly if you're not, feeling extra confident in, say, like English. I work with lots of families where English isn't their mother tongue, and mum doesn't feel so confident using it, but she's feeling like she has to. And I think that it shouldn't have to be that way, because when you use a language that you're most comfortable in, you're more likely to use other words, or you're more likely to engage with your child than if you used a language that was less comfortable. Stacey?
Exactly. No, and I think also, AAC devices are getting multiple languages now, so kids have more options. I always, just like you, I tell parents, whatever you do that. Whatever you speak in your home, speak in your home, because when your child does develop their method of communication, if they don't have whatever language you speak, then they can't talk to their grandparents who don't speak English. So now, they're communicating, but there's a whole pool of people they can't communicate with because you've stopped using your language. And unfortunately, parents are told that by doctors who have no clue of what autism is. And some speech therapists who maybe just have not had a lot of experience, or just maybe read old articles and just are not aware. But like she said, I mean, kids I've kids who are trilingual, bilingual, and turn around and talk to grandmother in Vietnamese and turn around and talk right back to me. I have core boards in 2 languages, and kids are it's so much easier for them to switch back and forth. But you know what I will say, Ozgul, I find that a lot of, and maybe it's just in the States, or maybe just in Puerto Rico, a lot of Spanish speaking families that I've met, they use both languages. Like they'll speak in Spanish and English, and I'm like, okay, how do you decide how do you choose which words you're gonna use? Yeah. So they're even the kids are getting the model of using English words within the Spanish. Yeah. So it's kind of modeled as well, as kids just kind of use that in a smart way. Our kids know what they need. Yeah. And they will use it, find it, seek it, because they know exactly what they need. That's why we have to follow their lead. I'm not saying we let them run all over the grocery store. I'm saying we follow their lead.
Totally.
Absolutely. I'm just going to bring a little bit of psych in here. And that is to say, I used to work, before I worked here, I worked in an infant psychology research lab. And we did longitudinal studies, international studies on the difference in the brain development of bilingual babies as opposed to monolingual babies. And by exposing our kiddos to multiple languages in the home, we halt what's called neuronal pruning. And so our auditory neurons are sort of a use it or lose it thing. Your brain tunes into your mother tongue, and then it kind of prunes out what it doesn't need. By exposing them to multiple languages, we maintain so much more of that neural network, and for the rest of their lives, after the kind of developmental window closes, for the rest of their lives, those kiddos are better able to receive and express languages going forward. So parents are coming to me all the time saying, my doctor told me not to speak Arabic in front of my child, or it'll delay their speech or whatever. And I'm like, No.
No.
I know you're actually giving your kiddos this amazing gift that people like me who only had one language spoken in their home ever will never get. And that was very clearly demonstrated to me when I tried to learn languages later in life and was deeply unsuccessful. Let's just say that, which would.
And kids today are so exposed to YouTube in every country. A lot of kids are learning English on their own, even if their parents don't speak English, because YouTube is just, I mean, all kids around the world have access to it. And most of the time it's English.
And look, just a word on the YouTube as well, Stacey. I'm just thinking of a funny thing in that one of my little kiddos that I worked with in Europe, he was exposed to Turkish and English, but then he started speaking Russian because he was really interested in all the Russian videos. And but then his mum didn't know what she was talking about. So it's also about being on top of what your child's accessing, because if you can't facilitate and if you can't respond, then you could be opening up a whole can of worms, you know, in that area. So
yes. I had a 4-year-old that taught himself, he grew up in Texas. He was 4 years old. He taught himself Japanese, Spanish, and was learning Arabic just using his iPad. And I remember bringing him to his teacher for kindergarten. He was 5 at the time. And I said to her, there's nothing you have to offer this child. He's on a 2nd grade level. He's got 4 languages. Nobody knows how to speak to him in the other languages. He is absolutely brilliant. I said, all I need you to do is keep him safe until we figure out where he can go, because right now we have no other place for 5-year-olds who are brilliant in speaking 4 languages. Don't ask him to do A for apple, He's way past that, right? Yeah, he was one of those kiddos. Yes.
That's amazing, isn't it? Oh, I had a kiddo who did a similar thing, but I can't remember what language it was. It might have been French. Just taught himself French from YouTube, kind of thing. And he was also hyperlexic. I wonder if those 2 things.
Oh, yes.
Totally.
Definitely.
Totally a thing, right? Yeah.
Yes.
One of the, so there's a question from Jessica. My daughter has basic language communication and can answer and make requests of items if she wants them, but has no expressive language, i.e. happy or sad, how she's feeling. She's 6 years of age. How can I go about starting to teach her these things? Ozgul?
Yeah, okay. So I guess, you know, if we think about, again, language is quite an abstract form. You know, we take it for granted. We just think you wake up and you start talking and it's just the way it is, but it's not. It's a process that develops, you know, over time, and it's a reciprocal process. It's a 2-way process. And if you think about the way it develops, generally you start understanding first the more concrete language or the concrete words. So the things that you can see and touch and things like that. And so, you know, when we're talking about emotions, they're even more abstract, you know. So and understanding emotions and being aware of what I'm feeling and recognizing those emotions in myself as well as in others can also be a difficult thing. So I guess, you know, if our child's having difficulty, I think with first of all, we've got to look at giving them the vocabulary, but also perhaps pairing that with some visuals to support their understanding. So to make it more concrete. So again, you know, if you think about it with our language, some words we can say it, and so I'll give you an example. So if I said cup and I had a cup, you can see it. But if I said something like jump, you know, as soon as I do the action, that's gone. But while I'm doing it, it would be meaningful. And then same goes for if you think about emotions, you know, what is that emotion? What does it mean? You know, so if I'm talking about happy, you know, what's the visual representation for that? Or if we're talking about what does that feel like in my body? So helping the child to recognize first and foremost, what are those emotions? What's the name we give to them? What does it look like? I guess that's where I would start with that. But Stacy, you might have more to add.
I will just add one thing to that. I loved everything that you said. I think it's a matter of also keeping in mind emotions are related to the interoceptive system, and it is a very nuanced thing, right? I mean, I'm an adult. If someone asked me 5 minutes ago, how are you feeling? I have to think about it and figure out which one. And then 5 minutes later, I will feel something differently, right? 30 minutes from now, I will feel differently than I felt before we started. So just keeping in mind that, like you said, it's really abstract, but also just remembering it's related to that interoceptive system, and everyone's feelings are different. Everyone expresses them differently, and it's just not concrete. So it can be a little tricky. And 6 is very young, very, very young. Yeah, very young.
That's interesting. It leads into one of the other questions that we have here, which is, what are some key indicators that a parent can look for to kind of ascertain their child's level of communication development? Just like summarize that in a couple of sentences, if you could. I'm sure that's easy.
Go for it, Stacy.
It's one of those things where it's like, so level of communication development, like, what does that even mean, right? What does that mean? It's all children, and I say all, generalizing, and there's always outliers, but even though autistic individuals communicate differently, it's still developed along the same sort of like track, right? Babbling, which they may babble with their AAC, they may like do gestalt babble, there's all kinds of things. So it's really just a matter of the levels of communication development are different at different times, at different parts of the day. I mean, it really just depends. There's no, this is what they can do every single day. This is what they can do, and this is what they can't do every single day. It really does vary. I think the way to look at it is not so much, we have enough assessments, right? Like, we're bombarded with assessments and numbers that really don't give a clear indication of our children, because they're standardized, and standardized things require communication. And that's something that our kids are working on. And so thinking in terms of just look for things like, does your child understand the power of communication, right? Do they understand, are you creating opportunities for them to practice communication? Is your child able to make requests, right? I mean, just those little things are foundation, and then everything else is just building on it as you build that relationship. It's really about building a relationship. It really is about building a relationship. You can do the checklist, but I try to keep parents away from those checklists. It just becomes daunting, and it's exhausting, and it's never consistent, because things are not always every Monday is not always going to be the same. Every week, we're not always going to, communicate. And so just thinking of that power of communication, are they initiating? Are they making attempts? Are you creating enough opportunities for attempt? And then, are you using their interests to build that social engagement? And of course, always make sure they're sensory regulated. I don't know. Do you have a concrete way I have a chart that I can always share, but I just, I try to keep, I think it's very, it's exhausting for parents to keep looking at a checklist and what my child cannot do, right? I know we're moving towards strength-based goals, but not everybody's there. The testing's not there. Criteria for meeting support is not there. So a lot of times when we put these, like, this is what your child should be doing, check, 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 it can be very disheartening for parents. So it's really about looking for that connection and that attempt and that understanding the power more than anything, and just build on it. I know that's not a concrete answer for parents, but there's so many checklists already. We just really need to not look for, our kids just develop differently, and it's okay. It comes in the way it's supposed to come when it's supposed to come, and it appears in the way it's supposed to appear.
Yeah. Sometimes, Stacey, you know what I do, just to help put it into some sort of concrete form, or to understand where the child is coming or is at. You know, when you talk about that power of communication, helping them understand or realize that. And I think I like to talk more about, rather than checklists and, you know, is your child doing this or that, it's more about what are the functions of the communication. So, you know, sometimes some of our parents can come in and say, look, my child can say all the letters of the alphabet, they know all their colors, they can name all the animals, but when I ask them a question, or when they can't ask me for what they want, you know, like they want a drink and they can't use their language. So then I ask, well, how is your child letting you know what they want, for example? So, you know, like that requesting. So that's a function of communication, letting somebody know you want something, whether it's an object or whether you want help. So that's a function. And then there are other functions like the commenting, or like the asking, or like the even protesting. So saying no is actually a function of communication, you know. So I like to look at it in those ways, because it helps us then see, okay, what's my child doing? Is my child requesting? How are they requesting? And how can I help them develop that? Or is my child able to tell me when they don't want something? How are they letting me know? Are they able to shake their head? Can they say no, or do they just cry and expect me to, you know, read their mind, kind of thing? So it's about working through where your child's at with those functions, and to get it, or help them to get to a level that we can understand them, because we're limited in our understanding of them. So it's about what can we put in place to help them convey their message in a way to X, Y, or Z person, so that they get their needs met. And that's going to reduce frustration and meltdowns and things like that. So I think that's the key indicators for me. And I find that really helpful. Would you agree, Stacy?
I like that. So what I'm hearing, Ozgul, is you're going to make that into a resource. I think that's a great resource. That's what I just heard. Did you guys hear that? I just heard that Ozgul's going to put that on something concrete for for coaches and families.
I believe that's,
I heard it. Did you hear that, Ella? I heard that. I heard that. Yeah.
I believe that's called being voluntold, that you're going to do something.
There's a word for it now?
Yeah, voluntold. Absolutely. I love it.
Okay.
That's a good one. I'm going to ask just for everybody's kind of top 3, like easy to take home, fun, actionable communication strategies for reducing frustration-driven meltdowns. And then we're going to wrap up, unless anybody in the, any of the parents want to add anything. So our top 3 communication strategies for reducing frustration-driven meltdowns. What do we reckon? That's a nice take home.
That's easy. We can both. Yeah. I'll start and you can add, Stacy. So first and foremost, I think that we need to tune into our kids. So we need to become better observers and more aware of the subtleties in our child's communication. So I think first and foremost, as adults, we need to become better at tuning in. That's going to help us. The other thing is getting down to our child's level. Like we always talk about, get down to your child's level, get down to your child's level. Why? Because, you know, when you're an adult, you're up here and your child's down here and you're expecting them to communicate with you, when in fact, if you get down and match their level, you're going to be able to see their face, they're going to be able to see yours. There's so much more that you're going to be able to, you know, connect once you get at face level. So that's another one. And I'll just add one more and leave the rest to you, Stacy. No. And I would say simplify your language. You know, keep it simple. It's because sometimes for our kiddos, it's, you know, or with anyone who is having difficulty with understanding language, or, you know, understanding vocabulary, sometimes as adults too, you know, we put a lot more words together in a sentence compared to our kids. And if we're saying too much, they're getting lost in that, you know. It could be sounding like blah, 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 car, blah, 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 shoe to them. you know. Whereas if you said, where's your shoes, or get your car, you know, that's going to be a lot easier than, oh, look, I want you to go and get your car that's over there and can you bring it over to me, you know, like that's just too much. So I would say keep it simple, really simple. If your kids aren't even using single words, I would be then saying keep your sentences limited maybe to 2 to 3 words, emphasize the key word. So you know, they can really, it's almost like a light bulb going on every time you emphasize the word. So you might say, you know, do you want the car? So let's go with the car example, but you might go, do you want the car? Look at the car. So what I'm doing is I'm using that intonation that Stacy mentioned earlier, and I'm emphasizing the word that I'm saying, highlight, highlight, this is the one. It's going to be easy for my child to understand and learn that word and perhaps then come out and use it if I keep it simple. Over to you, Stacy, for the rest of it.
All right, so top 2 ways to reduce meltdowns. I'm going to always say, if your child is regulated, there is less of a chance of a meltdown, no matter how many people are in the grocery store. So sensory regulation is the utmost key to minimize, decrease meltdowns. Number 2, visuals, 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 visuals. Even if your child is a verbal communicator, if they're emerging verbal, if they're 1 word, 2 word, 500 sentences, if they are struggling with access to their words, offer a visual, like go get your shoes, show the shoe, show the visual schedule. That is what the visuals help. Remember, words disappear once we say them. The visuals stay, giving them time to process. Number 3, always, always, always have some way for your child to communicate. If they use an AAC, it needs to be charged up and available at all times, not when we decide they have something to say or we have something to ask them. The other part is, it's like putting duct tape on you, right? It's like duct taping and saying, I'm not going to let Stacy talk until I say she can talk, which that would be meltdown all day, right? So always have their AAC device available. And even if your child is proficient with their PEC system, proficient with their verbal most of the time, keep in mind they are working hard, and just give your kids a little grace and know that sometimes they just don't have access to their words. They just don't have access to their words. We have a couple of more minutes. Do we have 1 more minute, 2 more minutes, Ella?
Yep, go for it.
I will, in order to help parents understand the access, you know, not having access to your words, that doesn't mean that your child will grow up and not be able to participate in conversations. It means as your child grows and understands their autistic identity and themselves, they learn strategies in order to navigate their adult life, right? Perfect example, I'll finish with this story. Torin, some of you might have seen Torin on the Facebook page. Torin and I, you know, during a podcast, on days when Torin does not have access to his words, and Torin is pretty efficient verbally, right? When he doesn't have access to his words, the strategy he uses is, during the podcast, he just asks me questions. And then I can tell when it's one of those moments where he doesn't have access to his words, because while I'm talking, he's preparing a question, practicing, and then he outputs it, and then he gets a break while I keep talking. Now, that's not every time we do the podcast, but on those days, that's the strategy, and it works, right? That's where I meet him halfway and we work it out. But I want parents to understand that communicating differently does not mean your child will not be able to do whatever it is they choose to do when they get older. And yes, our children choose to do what they want to do when they become adults. Memo to all parents, right? I'm a mom of 2 boys, and no matter what you dream for your children or want, they do what they want, just like we've all chosen our path, right, as adults. And some people maybe not, but most people choose and decide. And so just know that it's important to give a little grace. I don't even want to say be patient, because, you know, everybody's patience level and threshold's different, but give your child grace and just keep remembering, as frustrated as you are, your child is working triple that just to say good morning sometimes, right? And so keep that in mind when you're frustrated, because if you decrease your frustration because you understand how hard your kid is working, then that intensity won't be in the air, and that will also minimize meltdowns. That's my message.
I love that. Oh, thank you. Thank you both very much for all your insight and wisdom. We will be back next week with another webinar on starting our social sphere section of the webinar. So I look forward to seeing everybody then. And thank you again to our speeches. We'll chat with you next week.
Thanks.
Bye everybody. Thank you. Bye.